Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be going over how to build a loadout in Warzone. Starting off, you need to know what guns are going to be the meta. The meta will change, so there's no point in giving you a specific class for each gun in the game, because eventually it'll be a different gun. I will be going over the primary, the secondary, the perks, the lethal, and the tactical into significant detail that'll allow you to have a better understanding of what to choose and what you need to be rocking in order to have a higher success rate in Warzone. Starting with the primary weapon, as I said, I'm not going to go over specific detail of what guns to use. Right now, the DMR or the AUG or any of these guns right here are going to be meta. But let's start with going down to a test class. The Modern Warfare weapons will typically rock a suppressor. In fact, all guns in the game will rock a suppressor. If you don't have a suppressor on your weapon, you are simply doing an injustice, and you're not going to really have the advantage when starting a gunfight. So you should always rock a suppressor no matter what gun you're using, unless the gun doesn't have a suppressor or you don't have it unlocked yet. For Modern Warfare weapons, you're going to want to rock the monolithic suppressor. The reason being is because it doesn't really negatively affect your stats at all. Aim down sight speed, really not that important for an AR. And it gives you sound suppression, which is obviously very valuable in Warzone because it allows you to get the first shots off without really having problems. And it gives you damage range, which is really good because obviously most of the fights you are taking in Warzone are at a distance, so the damage range will definitely help you to get that extra beefiness. Moving on to the barrel for Modern Warfare weapons, you just want any barrel on any gun that gives you following stats such as damage range, bullet velocity, recoil control, aim stability, accuracy, etc., things like this. But it can't come out the downside of any of those stats, such as these stats right here, or any other stats such as damage range or damage. These stats really aren't that bad. These aren't really that significant of a con, considering this is an AR. This isn't meant for heavy rushing into a building. This is meant for long distance, maybe 40 to 100 meter encounters. This isn't really intended for much more. So these two effects right here aren't really a problem, especially since it gives you such a significant boost in this regard. Now for underbarrels, for Modern Warfare weapons, you're going to want to typically stick toward the Commando foregrip or the Merc foregrip, maybe the Ranger foregrip in some cases, and let me explain why. For the Commando foregrip, it gives you recoil stabilization, and it gives you aim stability, both very good for hitting shots more accurately, at the negative of movement speed, which again for an AR really isn't a big downside. The reason why you want to choose the Commando foregrip over these is because it gives you the most recoil stabilization and aim stability. Merc doesn't give you aim stability, it gives you hipfire accuracy, which isn't really the best on an AR. This one gives you recoil control and aim stability, but it's a little different, as in you can see the values on mobility are lower, but the values on range are slightly higher, and the accuracy is slightly higher. So typically for Modern Warfare weapons, you just want to hunt for, on an underbarrel, recoil control and aim stability. And if you're looking for hipfire accuracy, you can go with Merc foregrip. Now for the ammunition, for Modern Warfare weapons specifically, typically ARs or any gun for Modern Warfare, you're going to probably want to rock the largest magazine size. That's because for Modern Warfare weapons, it doesn't really give you a negative downside. It's just aim down sight speed. Again, that's an AR. You don't really need that. It's going to slow your speed down, but that's not, again, that big a problem because you shouldn't be running with this gun out. You're probably going to run with your SMG out or something longer range or super close range. And it obviously gives you the ammo capacity. Now, as you can see on this gun, I have the TAC laser equipped. That's because I'm not rocking an optic. If you wanted to rock an optic, the best optic in the game, in my opinion, and I would say probably most people's opinions, would be the VLK 3.0 optic. This is probably the best sight in the game. You can go with alternatives such as the Corp Combat Holo sight, but that has a pretty nasty reticle. Unless you level up the reticle and get a new one, you can't really use this that effectively compared to the VLK. Let's say that you're using a suppressor, which you should always be, a barrel, which you should always be using, underbarrel should always be using. Ammunition is specific to certain guns. Maybe you might want to use a rear grip instead, but typically for a Modern Warfare weapon, you're going to want to be using a ammunition type, which increases your mag size. So now you have a suppressor, a barrel, an underbarrel, and ammunition. Some of these, I would say all four of these categories are pretty mandatory for nearly all weapons to have them in the slots. Let's say you're not using an optic and you want to use a laser, a stock, a perk, or a rear grip. What do you need to look for? Well, you're going to want to look for things like this. Aim down sight speed, aim stability, more notably. Something like aim stability, or for the 5 milliwatt laser, you're going to want the hip fire accuracy, or the sprint to fire speed. On a rear grip, you're going to want to look for, again, recoil control, aim stability right here, or aim down sight speed. Perks are pretty underutilized in this game. Not a lot of people use them, but when they do use them, they're probably going to be rocking either FMGA or sleight of hand. Some people also like to have a stocked class, which is the class I clicked on for this one, which people have fully loaded on. This will give you starting maximum reserve ammo for jumping into a game extremely late, whether you're on like the second to last circle and there's nowhere you can land to loot and there's teams all around you fighting and you need a gun with max ammo. I would get fully loaded on a class. Now moving on to Cold War weapons, because Cold War weapons are a little different in how you attach them and what you look for. So we're going to be using the AUG as an example. So again, you're always going to want to have a suppressor, a barrel, and an underbarrel. For me, I'm not using an ammunition on the AUG because I find it to be rather insignificant. So for the muzzle, again, you want a suppressor, and at this point, the agency silencer is the best in the game because it gives you damage range and sound suppression, just like the monolithic suppressor. Moving on to the barrel. Again, you're always going to want to have a barrel because they typically give you things like damage, fire rate, recoil control, damage range, things like that, stats like that you really want to look for. On the AUG specifically, I don't have Task Force, not like I would use it, but as you can see, Task Force gives you damage, effective damage range, and bullet velocity. You're going to want to stay away from something like this because in Warzone, you're typically fighting long-range encounters. In this one, even though it gives you all of these really valuable stats, it gives you pretty bad cons. It gives you vertical recoil control reduction and horizontal recoil control reduction. These outweigh the benefits from this, in my opinion, so I'm rocking Strike Team. You're going to want to look for things like damage, fire rate, or desired stats like that, like effective damage range, things like this. And even these aren't that bad, but you want to stay away from really bad negative cons like this, because this will just make your recoil control go out of whack. Even if you can control it, I would still stay away from them, because they're simply just not as good as rocking these, which you would end up hitting more shots. Moving on to the underbarrels for Cold War. This is typically universally Field Agent foregrip for every single weapon you can get this attachment on, because it gives you a lot of vertical and horizontal recoil control at the cost of basically nothing, shooting movement speed, which isn't really that important. This is probably the universal best attachment to use on any Cold War weapon. If you don't have it unlocked yet, you can still rock the front grip. Now as for the optics in Cold War, most, if not every single weapon that isn't, I would say, an SMG or a shotgun is going to be using the Vision Tech 2 times or the Axial Arms 3 times. If you don't want to use these two optics, let's say you're using something such as an AR or an SMG or even a tactical rifle and you just don't want to use something that zooms in like this, I would suggest the Mill Stop Reflex. Probably the best sight in the game if you're not looking for zoom. But other than this, if you're not going to rock the mill stop, I would suggest simply just getting used to the iron sights of the weapon and going with something like ammunition or a stock. Moving on to the rest of these categories, the secondary categories, the laser, ammunition, the rear grip, and the stock. Again, you're just going to want to look for something that gives you aim stability, aim down sight speed, recoil control, things like this. And for the rear grip, I have something unlocked, which is SAZ-R Jungle Grip, which gives you the aim down sight speed and flinch resistance. You can also switch this for ammunition, laser, or a stock, depending upon what you're looking for in particular. Let's move on to perks. Perks are pretty straightforward in this game. Perk 1, Perk 2, and Perk 3. Perk 1 is typically a tie between EOD or Cold-Blooded, and I see sometimes people use Double Time. The advantage to EOD is, as it reads, takes reduced damage from non-score streak explosives and fire. That includes things like Thermite, Semtex, C4, and a couple other things I do believe. Claymore. I personally choose the rock EOD because I think it is superior to Cold-Blooded. Cold-Blooded makes you undetectable by AI targeting systems and thermal optics. Does not trigger high alert warning. This also has a hidden effect to where it makes it to where you do not appear on the advanced UAVs. Moving on to Perk 2. This is much more strict because you really only have one option, is to rock Ghost. Ghost makes you undetectable by UAVs, radar drones, and heartbeat sensors. Ghost is basically required to play Warzone, or Rebirth Island, depending upon what you're playing. To get around only having to use Ghost, you can actually have your first class set to overkill, which will give you a primary and a secondary gun, but then you can have a secondary class, such as these, that give you Ghost. It'll still allow you to pick up both of your primary and your secondary weapons, but you'll just have Ghost now. Moving on to Perk 3. Perk 3 is 99% of the time going to be amped, because it increases your weapon swap speed. The rocket launcher reload speed isn't really that important, but if you're using one, that's an added bonus. Amped is extremely useful over any of these other things, because you're going to go from a long distance fight to a short distance fight most of the time while playing Resurgence, Rebirth Island, or if you're playing the actual Warzone game mode, making Amped the superior option to anything else. Moving on to lethal equipment. So you only have really 3 options to be using in lethal equipment. You have C4, Semtex, and you have Thermite. C4 is a short thrown object and has incredibly high damage for vehicles and player damage. A Semtex can be thrown quite far and is really good against players, but does less damage against vehicles. And a Thermite grenade is extremely good at killing players if hit directly. A Thermite grenade is extremely useful in getting cleanups after you have knocked somebody. And the Thermite grenade can be thrown extremely far. And last but not least, we have the tactical equipment. Most people, I would say 99% of people, are going to be using the heartbeat sensor. This, as it displays, is a tablet that displays rough information about nearby enemies. This basically is a portable radar that you can use to scan, I think, 40 meters out and see who's near you. This is incredibly useful for pushing buildings, but other than that, it kind of falls off in late game as most people obtained Ghost by then. Other people use stun grenades or flash grenades. These are pretty self-explanatory. It'll flash the player or it'll stun them, making it harder for them to move. These are really good for people who are rushing, and is typically better to use in the late game compared to the heartbeat sensor, simply because people obtain Ghost. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. If you disliked the video or did not find it informative in any way, please leave a dislike, and put feedback down below in the comment section.